Hello and welcome to our discussion of something, a project that has sort of consumed our time for the last several years in some cases. The World of Ice and Fire, the book that we have co-written with George R.R. Martin, which is finally approaching...
Yes, there's finally a date that looks quite solid. It's October this year.
October this year, for sure, is coming out, and we're still kind of in the proofing, copying, editing, doing, and some artists still coming in.
But all the text is pretty much done. It's just polishing it now.
Yeah. So it's in essence done.
Yeah.
So we're releasing an excerpt from it, which fans will be able to find on our website in the all sorts of weird stuff area, and we'll have a link. I'll remember to do a link this time, or at least in the description I'll have
There's
a link.
also been some other...
There have been other excerpts, things that have come out. And we'll discuss those a little bit later and provide links for those as well. But we thought we would discuss a little bit sort of how it came about, how we worked on it with George, and what it contains. So now, obviously, it all kind of ties into our early contact and work with George on Westeros.org.
And when Elio was visiting the US, he ended up actually doing an impromptu visit to George's home in Santa Fe.
That was in 2004, I think.
I think so, yeah. So arranged very much off the cuff. And
yeah, I think that's right.
He brought up, he took you to dinner, and George brought up the idea of, he'd been contacted by publishers, basically. I had an interest in doing some sort of encyclopedia or, related work about Westeros, because you've got all these for all sorts. You've got all the Tolkien companions. You've got the one for the Wheel of Time. You've got for Pratchett and what
Terry Brooks of Shannara.
Yeah, all sorts of things. So
it seemed very natural for him. So we were in the Bull Ring. I think it was the name of the restaurant, and with Paris as well. We were eating and we were talking about various topics, not just the books, but somewhere it came up, sort of efforts like our concordance and things like that, and George brought it up, and he said, some people were interested in it, and I'd like you, Linda, to write it.
Yeah, because obviously he was still is in the middle of writing the books, and they wanted that sort of thing sooner rather than later. They didn't want to wait until all the books were out. Yeah,
it just makes more sense for. I mean, I think all of those guides that other than the Lord of the Rings companions and so on, all came out while the series is still going, because there's a feeling like when you invest this much money in a book like this, which has a fairly limited audience, literally like it's going to sell only to those people, that fraction of the readership who is really interested in stuff. Yeah. It's not going to be a number one bestseller in the same way as those books. And you have to have art and all these things. It's a fairly expensive book to put together. You kind of have to do it when the series is hot. Not when it's done, but when it's there's still a large interest, sort of, where people will see this is out and they'll get it. So that is why it's coming out now. Yes, it means there's some restrictions on what we can cover. Like maybe after the whole series is done, we'll end up having like a revised edition, which kind of I don't know if it's necessary. I don't know if it's necessary.
No.
To be honest with you, I think what the book does, it does very well, and it provides. But that's more of a content thing, so I'm getting a little off topic. But anyways, we discussed it, and so and it took a while. I think it was like the next year of a George email. By the way, the things are heating up on this book. There's like an auction, and publishers are bidding on it, and then like a month later, he said, it's done. We sold it. Random House, the publisher of the main series, actually got it.
I wasn't certain that it was going to go.
Yeah, I thought that was always interesting. I guess the fact that something like that another publisher could do.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't held under the contract that he had for the Song of Ice and Fire series. So there was a bidding process and so on, but they got it. And Anne Grohl, editor of the books, became our editor for this. And so in 2006 we went to Anaheim.
Yeah, for the World Con.
The World Con there.
And that's where we signed the contracts.
Yeah, we signed the contracts there, and we met with, we had breakfast with George and Anne, and we discussed very preliminary sort of ideas and certain things. It was really cool. And then I think once we got home, I think the first thing I did was we worked on an outline of sort of the things, like breaking down how we would think the book would be structured and what it would cover.
Yeah.
That eventually got signed off on. And one of the big parts of the book in the initial conception, was going to be that it contained a setting guide and then a character guide. And it would cover characters from the novels and sort of like a little character bios and so on.
Yeah, because this was going to be a resource for readers, both about the world and then about the characters.
But I mean, 2006, the whole mobile app thing
hadn't taken off at all. So I think that was the first thing that we also started writing, was the character bit. And after working for a while on that, we realized that there was a problem. We had been contracted for 50,000 words.
Yeah. Now, at the time they said 50,000 was this sort of just a placeholder, but they thought maybe at most 90,000.
Yeah, and it soon turned out that the characters alone could cover that easily. So then we started culling. Okay, we can't do primary, secondary, and tertiary characters. We have to start cutting into this, and maybe we'll just do big profiles of important characters. And we started cutting more into this. And for me, I always felt that the longer we worked on it, that the characters were a problem, because one of the things we did to deal with the fact that we were writing this in the middle of the series being published was that we wanted a way of covering for the fact that we couldn't put everything in there. There are things that George hasn't made up yet. There's things that he doesn't want to reveal just yet to not spoil the books, basically. So we wanted to work out a conceit that would allow that. And I've always had a fondness for the in-world guide idea. So we decided that it was going to be, the book is written by a maester. And he has only the in-world knowledge of things. So he could be wrong on some points, and he could choose to leave some points out. And that was going to allow us to structure it in a particular way. But the characters never fit that, obviously. I think we talked about them as appendices, basically.
Yeah.
For sort of, well, these don't belong to...
Yeah.
So the book was going to be more a collection of separate... with very separate origins in that sense. And so for me, it was a relief when we got to the point that they proposed the app.
Yeah, the World of a World of Identifier, or also the Game of Thrones guide for it was on Android and Nook. Don't know why. I've never asked why we have two different names for the same product, because this is very confusing. The app is actually is considered sort of, in a way, like the ebook of it's part of the same contract, actually. And
basically ended up being an addendum to the contract.
It basically became sort of the ebook companion to... It doesn't mean we're not going to have a proper ebook of the World Book when it comes out, but it is sort of falls under the contract in the same way. So basically all the work we did for the book up to that point got shoved, or almost all of it got shoved into the app instead, and has since been expanded and really, I mean, it works really well as an app, as a guide.
There we can really go into all the characters and everything. Yeah. We don't have to restrict ourselves to just a few characters. We can really cover everything. And also, we don't have to be concerned about it being an in-world look at things, because obviously it's just purely sort of out of character. It's taken straight from the novels. And
then that left the rest of the stuff. I mean, then suddenly we went from having way too much
to having way too little
for a while, because we did the first draft of the main.
We did a skeleton, basically, where we wanted information to go. And what we did is, initially we pulled information from the concordance and just kind of pasted that in to show, okay, this is what we have about the North, this is what we have about Dorne, this is what we have about the Dawn Age, and so on, to just show where is their information. And the idea, we always expected, basically to get notes from George that we were going to use to flesh out the sections that weren't.
Yeah.
There were just not enough. There were more holes than actual content.
I did actually write. We did actually write stuff. Not
just
having
we started to show them. I remember that we did a skeleton and we pasted in the stuff.
And particularly it was useful to show, like, and by the way, here there's like, we have 6 comments.
Yeah,
6
basically,
notes,
just to show where
nothing.
the information. And then we started taking the sections where we had
more information
to write it together.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we wrote it together, and we started, and what we would do in the process of that is, like, when writing about the North, like, one of the things that we loved doing best of all was coming up with maesters and their books they wrote, that we would cite in the sidebars and in the bodies of a text. Our maester would comment, this maesters in this text, and we love doing that stuff.
Because he's writing, our maester, he's writing a little bit of a popular history, sort of.
I guess we'd call it a popular history.
He's condensing information and trying to present it in a more easily more accessible form, rather than these huge dusty dry old tomes.
Our maester has a unique sort of background, and he basically was raised in the Citadel and was a foundling, basically, who got raised in the Citadel, and he set out to do this text, and he sort of has this little utopian idea that maybe men who know how to read, like even common men, if they have their letters, like they might somehow have a copy of this book. It's education
for the masses.
It's education for the masses. It doesn't really work, but this particular copy, or what we see initially, is sort of a dedication copy for the king. And maybe, he has them granted, it may be used for the education of the princes. And it dates it. I mean, the book he started writing it before the beginning of A Game of Thrones. But I think it's fair to say that it kind of touches on stuff beyond A Game of Thrones. He never got around to presenting it to Robert, put it that way.
Yeah.
So there's a little...
Otherwise, it's pretty spoiler-free.
It's fairly spoiler-free.
It's just for Game of Thrones.
It's basically
a little bit at the end. The afterword, if you skip the afterword.
Yeah, the afterword touches on stuff going through into Dance of Dragons, but everything else basically stops with A Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
So, but it's not like the world has massively changed in a lot of areas. I mean, a lot of it is sort of the history, and the history is done, right?
Yeah.
So he's written it to be accessible, and it's so it condenses, and it simplifies, and it presents. He does present, like, this scholar has a lot more on this, or this scholar argues with this one about this. So there's a little bit of a scholarly thing, and it's been very fun because it's in setting. That's part of our, as you said, our solution to not knowing everything. Like, the maesters don't know everything; they know a lot. What we're presenting is the body of knowledge that a maester might present as this is what we've got in a reduced, sort of condensed form. But it doesn't mean some of that knowledge can't be completely wrong. It doesn't mean some of the knowledge is very argued about, and that he might...
There are opinions about things, and...
He might follow one opinion instead of another. It doesn't mean, like, all of a sudden, all the history can be thrown out. No, it's not like everything is a secret history.
It might be minor details, minor perspectives on things, basically. Yeah. And it sort of played interestingly into the way the continued work on fleshing out this outline that we had made, because... It took longer, obviously, than we signed the contract in 2006. And with George being in the middle of writing the books, a lot of people complain about him taking time for side projects. But the fact is that he didn't take time. He was working on the books and not sitting down and writing for the World Book until he felt that he was at a time where, either he was stuck on something or it was between writing on things. But once he got to it, basically the idea was that he was going to go over our outline and flesh it out where there were gaps. Either provide notes so we could fill them in. Actually, that's what we expected from the start. We expected notes.
Exactly.
But then he started with the Targaryens.
Yeah, I was thinking, when we had gaps, like sometimes we present, like, here, we don't know what this is, and we put a note next to it, like, ask George about this.
Yeah.
Like, what is the answer to this? Or what? Because our maester would know.
Yeah.
And it feels like we have to present it here the way we wrote it. We kind of have to have the answer. In other cases, we did speculate. Like, we extrapolated. Like, we took a best guess. Like, there's something about the Tullys.
Yeah.
And their role in the sort of kingdom of when, Heron ruled.
So
we kind of had, like, a speculation there. We put it in, and we noted, this is speculative.
Yeah. And so we basically left it up to George to decide, does our extrapolation and speculation stay in, or does he have another idea? And in some cases, those extrapolations did stay in. In other cases, he has a completely different idea.
Yeah.
And
then we have the Targaryens. Like, that's the first stuff where he decided suddenly to start, like, the kingdom stuff, like, of, like, the North and the Stormlands stuff is, I think, ours are very much the sort of skeleton.
There was very much weaving together. He'd read basically what we had, and he didn't actually send us notes. He turned out that it was easier for him to, I guess, write.
Yeah.
That's how he does it, rather than taking notes. He writes. So there he would write and basically weave in new stuff with what we already had down on the page.
Yeah. Then Targaryens, I mean, we had some basic stuff, but I mean, our initial Targaryen
a lot of the
history,
earlier ones are more holes than
yeah,
comments, basically.
So we had a bit, like, we could have done like a very basic history, but it would be really basic. And then suddenly these things started showing up in email boxes where George has written
10,000 words.
10,000 words.
30,000 words.
30,000 words. 40,000 words.
Showing up a few days apart, basically.
Yeah, it was literally like he was taking a little break from Winds of Winter, or maybe he was, whenever he kind of needed to mull something over, instead of just kind of, he pushed it sort of more in the back burner and he'd work on something else and let it kind of just marinate a bit before he went back to Winds of Winter. And he just wrote massive amounts, and quite shocking, to the point where he's talking now about after A Dream of Spring, the final novel was published, that he may publish, finish up these histories that he wrote and present the Fire and Blood. Fire and Blood would be a book of Targaryen history written by this Archmaester Gildane.
Because it turned out what he wrote was much too long, so we basically had to take our conceit of the insetting Maester condensing works, and we basically decided, well, all of these very long passages about the Targaryen are written by a Maester that George invented then, Maester Gildane, and our Maester's taking them and condensing them.
Yeah. So our Maester has taken all the knowledge he's learned, and he has found, we're treating it as Archmaester Gildane's history is a lost history that our Maester has found portions of recently, and he's incorporated this, and it's a way of sort of, so he's
which will allow for other portions to be found in the future if necessary.
Yeah, exactly. Other portions will be found later, perhaps when Fire and Blood is published. So it was really fun playing with the conceit. So where we don't know the full extent of how the Dance of Dragons went down, and George can give us some notes. We got instead 50,000 words on the Dance of Dragons, and then we said, well, that's too long.
Yeah.
So the only section of Targaryen history that is absolutely 100% George in this book is we decided to have our Maester put the whole of Gildane's account of the conquest.
Yes, because it's the shortest of the sections that George wrote. So there it's pure George's writing from start to finish, whereas the other ones is basically our taking the new information provided by George and rewriting it in the same way that we rewrote the information existing in the books for other sections.
Yeah. Yeah, and the rest is sort of, it's like really condensed. Like we really condense it down much shorter, so it has all this new information, and certain phrases are, we do quote sometimes. Yeah. Gildane, there's little sidebars, well, in the words of Archmaester Gildane, and you'll have a direct quote from that material, but for the most part, our Maester is condensing it down, and he's going through and condensing down all this stuff. So, like with the Dance of Dragons, George actually ended up then using it to solve a problem he had with his book, Dangerous Women, where he was due to write Duncan Egg story, and that Duncan Egg story proved to be not forthcoming. It proved too difficult. Like he was stuck on something. I don't know quite yet what. But
I think he also suggested that it was getting a bit long. Maybe
it was getting a bit long as well. So he had just finished all this stuff in Dance of Dragons, and he kind of got the idea. Well, maybe this could fit. Dangerous Women. We have, the princess and the queen. We have these two female figures who are sort of at the center of this war, kind of. So Gardner Dole's edited that down. He took the Dance of Dragons material and he edited it to focus it more on those two women.
Yeah.
And ending basically with Rhaenyra's death.
So the material that we have on the dance covers a longer period, more perspectives, more characters, but it's even more condensed. But it basically gives a broader picture, whereas The Princess and the Queen focuses more narrowly on two of the characters, covers a shorter time span, but then gives more detail about the focus.
You had the whole thing when we talk about writers, how much detail they have, and our Dance of Dragons is like a mile wide, but it's an inch deep. It doesn't really go into depth. George's is sort of much narrower and deeper. It doesn't cover as much, but it covers it more completely.
Well, The Princess and the Queen, you should say, because obviously his original
absolutely, his original.
Everything.
It's everything. It's the Grand Canyon. It's a mile wide, it's a mile deep. But
and it's full of dead people.
It's full of dead people. And that's the case for other histories. Histories of, the sons of Aegon, the Conqueror, their heirs. the dance itself, the regency that follows Aerys, the Aegon third's ascension, Daeron, the young dragon, Baelor, all these things, all the way through Aegon the Fifth. Our Gildane's history, as our Maester has found it, ends with Aegon the Fifth, and Summerhall.
Yeah. And
George has talked about this, so we'll say, Summerhall, the presentation of Gildane's, our Maester found only fragments, like literal fragments, like a page that was a mess of Gildane's history, and up to and including Summerhall. And so there's some tantalizing little bits that we'll have in our book about what happened, but our Maester doesn't have a clear picture, and whatever Gildane says is mostly lost, at least in what we have found.
Yeah.
But there's some tantalizing little tidbits, because George has said that he had one of the idea of like maybe the page with that history has a big splash of ink covering half the words. I don't know if we went with that, or did we go with maybe what they had and said was a burnt manuscript and damaged. I don't know.
I'm not sure what the final ended.
Yeah, so hopefully that'll come out looking really nicely.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been really exciting, and I think the content, besides the Garian history, obviously, let's touch content. I mean, we have ancient history. We have initial sort of stuff about Valyria and the Children of the Forest, the First Men, the Andals. And the regional histories of the various regions of the Seven Kingdoms actually expands a lot more on some of that, like the Vale and the Stormlands. We get a lot, and the Riverlands, we get a lot about the Andal invasion and how they interacted with, the First Men and the various ways the First Men dealt with them.
And the Iron Isles.
The Iron Isles is a substantial piece of history. There are substantial histories for all these regions pre-conquest.
Yeah.
And yes, the North as well, and Dorne, all those regions. And then we have, after the Garian history and all that, we kind of wrap up with sort of Robert. I mean, it goes into Robert's reign and, the Greyjoy Rebellion, and ends pretty much just before the sort of Game of Thrones, basically. Except for the afterword, which we mentioned. But then we move into discussing the rest of the world. And there, we had a lot more gaps. Like, the Free Cities, I think we wrote some of the material in the Free Cities is actually ours, because we had enough there that we were able to write it, and George used that as his outline and fleshed things out and so on. But then we go further east or south,
and these are places where a lot of them he invented for the Lands of Ice and Fire.
Yeah,
pretty much. And there were some notes accompanying those inventions when we created the Lands of Ice and Fire, but for the most part, it was very bare bones, and that's where George really let his imagination loose. Yeah,
he wrote quite a bit on some of these regions. Fleshed out a lot of the history of, the Free Cities. Yeah. Sulfuros, the Summer Isles, has a significant section of material describing their history and their interactions. Yee has substantial material. Leng.
Yeah, the Kingdom of Sarnor.
The Kingdom of Sarnor, which...
Ashai, yes.
And Ashai. All those mysterious places that showed up on Lands of Ice and Fire get discussed. I think almost everything gets discussed to some degree. And it's exciting for us to see it, to read it. I mean, and I think it will be exciting for fans who care about sort of the world building and the history and where these characters are coming from in terms of their cultures and so on. It's really rich. And,
I think you're going to see a lot of, if you're a bit of an adventurer, there's going to be a lot of places where you'll go, oh, I'd like to see that, and I wish I could go there. And
yeah, so it's been a fantastic process. We've been quite blessed. George has been tremendous, and we're very grateful to have been involved in this. And I hope people like it as much as we hope they'll like it. We've tried really hard to make it something that fans will, every page, there'll be something new. There'll be our attempt is like every page have some little piece of information at least that just says, oh, I didn't know that before. Yeah. So there's a constant discovery.
And lots of art showing.
Yes.
Gorgeous, historical pieces, various places.
Yeah, we have a tremendous range of artists involved. Artists you've known from Song of Ice and Fire art before, like Michael Colmark. Mark Simonetti, who has presented here in this book, I think, the absolute definitive Iron Throne, done directly with George's input and approval. It's as close as anyone's ever going to get, short of George himself learning how to draw and doing it himself. Dragons from some amazing artists. Heraldry, there's heraldry in there. The maps from Michael Gallatley, beautiful, gorgeous sort of watercolor maps. We love those. Magali Villeneuve has done an amazing array of portraits.
Yeah, she's got stunning portraits.
Stunning portraits. There's this artist I've never heard before, and I'm going to start naming some of these artists who are involved. I believe, and I hope I have his name, is Jose Cabrera. He's a Spanish artist. He's worked mostly in military history magazines. If you've seen the military history magazines, some of the art they have is gorgeous, and his is phenomenal art. I adore his artwork, and I hope fans will adore it as well. His attention to detail, historical detail, and so on is just, again, costuming as well is fantastic. He's got a depiction of, I'll say, a Sword of the Morning, not Arthur Dane, but a Sword of the Morning. That's just to die for.
Yeah.
Who else? Let's see. Doug Wheatley. Chase Stone has done some really fabulous work. He's got a piece that he's working on right now that is just. I mentioned, our history goes from Gildane goes for Egg and the Fifth. And when I say Egg and the Fifth, I'm talking Egg from Duncan Egg. Yeah. And when I'm saying that we have the history, like we've last seen him in the Mystery Knight, we will learn some significant things that happened to him after that, like really significant, major, like these are things George is going to be writing stories about. And George is really a lot about, and he's always been about, it's not just the, what happens, but why and the how. Yeah. So he doesn't mind revealing some pretty massive things in the world book, because the whole point of the stories is, you may know that X, Y, Z happens, but you don't know why yet. Mm-hmm. And we're going to discover eventually when he writes more Duncan Egg stories how that goes. But I was flabbergasted, because we first talked about it. We first talked about it in a conference call, and we talked about it, and George had dug out his notes for what happens to Egg after that, and frantically writing down various details that he was providing, like this happened, and like I'm not gonna share that bit. That was a lot more disturbing than I recall it being. He wouldn't exactly say what happened, but. So we wrote using that, and then he went and he looked at it and he used that, and he added like most of the stuff. I thought, George doesn't want us to say this. That he put it all back in. Basically, almost everything is back in there. So yes, we know a little bit more. But anyways, it's I think fans of Duncan Egg will be really excited. And as I said, Stone has a piece for that section in particular, which was really kind of awesome and is a big reveal in its way, actually. So. And there are things that George wrote that are kind of touch on theories that will kill various theories that might ignite new ones.
Yeah.
There's one, I recall, there's one in particular where he quite casually, and I don't think George is aware of the theory, or maybe he just doesn't care, because he quite casually smashes one theory to pieces. He confirms sort of details of other significant theories in a way, doesn't answer fully or right or not, but certain details are kind of confirmed or denied. Those who love theorizing about the history, they're going to have a lot.
You're being a terrible tease.
I'm being a terrible tease. I mean, let's just say that the section on the Westerlands touches a lot on Tywin Lannister and Aerys, and I mean, the section on Aerys' reign touches a lot on the Lannisters and the Targaryens and various things. So, very, very, very cool. Art. Lots of beautiful dragon art, depictions of dragons, various kinds. I mean, obviously, George allows artists, he doesn't sit there and like approve every single piece, like and say it has to be exactly as it is in his head.
There are certain pieces that he was more hands-on with than others, like the Iron Throne, for example. We really wanted a definitive Iron Throne. So there's room for artists. You can't say that, this is absolutely 100% for everything, that this is absolutely how George would imagine it. But we've tried to give all the information that we have about the characters and be as thorough as possible about getting the details right, but then also allowing for artistic license, in the sense that if you were to imagine that this book was illustrated, obviously the style isn't the way that a medieval manuscript would be illustrated, but if you imagine that these events were illustrated after the fact, obviously the artists would have to use their imagination if they weren't standing right there and drawing as that happened.
Yeah, I mean, the art is, obviously that's the one thing we have a bit of a difficulty with. Like the art is out of character. It's not in book art. It would be amazing. It'd be remarkable to have this fully illuminated text of actual illuminations.
Yeah. But obviously, then you'd all be stuck in a medieval style of art, which couldn't be as accurate and realistic.
It would be a far more. I mean, I would love to see like a limited edition of the World Book from like Subterranean Press, where they hire an artist or a calligrapher and someone who knows how to do illuminations, and strip out all that art and just put in medieval style art, just as a collector's piece. I mean, maybe leather binding and so on. That'd be gorgeous.
You could do a section of it, maybe,
or just a section.
Yeah,
I don't know, but it but the art is beautiful, and I think people will be excited by it, just as a piece of artwork. To have all these beautiful pieces of art from depicting so many things.
Yes, I don't think anyone, if you're fans of Wheel of Time and were disappointed by the art in Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, I don't think that anyone's going to be feeling the same about.
No. I mean,
there were a lot of unfortunate events surrounding how that art came out, apparently, we've had a lot more time for the art. And that's what the last bit of time now is going to, is completing.
A lot more. I mean, the one thing they did there is I think they had just one artist.
They had one artist, and he got much less time than he expected.
Was it less time and money?
Less time and money.
Like the amount. They kind of gave him less money than he should have had. So Jordan apparently claimed, anyways, that had he known that they had given him so little, he would have paid for.
Because he had apparently had a meeting with and seen sketches and thought the fantastic, and was really looking forward to it, and it didn't come out as good as it could have. So
the artist was too much work, too little pay for it. This is what you get.
Yeah.
So we have not had that issue. So
we don't have one consistent style, because we have a lot of different artists.
Yes.
But I think that's definitely part of the charm as well.
I think it's the charm. You see artists some artists you've never seen before, kind of working on it. It should be exciting, and I mean, I think at the end of the book we'll have a full listing of all the contributors, because I remember one of the important things George said, like, regardless who we use, I want to make sure every single artist gets credited, because he cares about the artists get their credit for what they did. Because a lot of these books you kind of don't necessarily know, they treat it like it's stock art, and you don't have a clear idea.
And it was always a big part of George's conception of this. He wanted a big, gorgeous book with lots of art, because he loves his art, and
he loves the art.
We love fantasy art as well, and illustrations, and
so I think that covers everything.
Yes, other than briefly mentioning the materials that are now
there's some material out. We mentioned our excerpt will be coming out.
George obviously had the earlier excerpt.
George had the excerpt on Aegon's Conquest, which is that's 100% George. And actually our excerpt, which is, well, this video is coming out when I posted the excerpt. So this excerpt is about Nymeria and the Rhoynar and their fight with Valyria and Garin the Great and so on. So that excerpt is also actually 100% George, because I recall, I kind of tried to piece together a speculative history of what happened.
Yeah.
And to the point, and I guess it was good enough because George contacted us and said, "Hey, like all this stuff here that you have, like, is that somewhere in the books? Because don't quite recall it." And he said, no, it was all speculative, George. Like, we noted that, like,
because he had some other ideas.
He had some very different ideas. So, but it's kind of nice to he himself wasn't sure. Like, was that mine? Maybe it was, but no, that one was speculative. I think something happened. I didn't quite manage to mark that one as speculative as I should have. But anyways, that's sort of, it's now all his, because he has a very different history, very different plans for what happened. And you'll get a taste of that. Other excerpts. AboveTheTreeline.com, which is sort of a publishing clearinghouse for books resellers, has some stuff which technically I'm not. They've done this once before, and that material was pulled. It wasn't supposed. So technically speaking, I'm thinking about it more. Maybe that material shouldn't be up there, but the fact is, we do know from them that some of it they were fine with, like Barnes & Noble releasing it and so on. So I think it's fine that stuff is out there mostly. There's a PDF that we allowed discussion on, which I think was actually for sure not supposed to be out there in the public. But it's out there. which gives a more of a look, gets a look at some of the art, includes a very incomplete. As I said, it was internal. It was supposed to be used by book buyers, not by the public. It was just an early look at the Stark family tree, because we're going to have a couple family trees: the Starks and the Targaryens, and I think maybe a Lannister tree.
Yeah.
These are not full trees that go all the way back to the beginning of time. We're not having a Stark tree that goes back to Brandon the Builder. Sorry. Ours comes from a very specific point. I think it starts with Cregan Stark, or maybe his father. I can't quite recall. Yeah. And goes down to the present, basically. And the Targaryen tree goes from Aegon. Well, actually, I think maybe mentions Aegon's father and sort of notionally his sort of great-great-grandfather. But down to present. So,
But obviously, all of these that are coming out, I mean, the PDFs and such and the previews, do keep in mind that, as I said, we are still copy editing. So
there's still...
there are little errors, spelling of names and such, and we are going through and doing our best to make sure that they're not in the final product.
Yeah, because these pages, actually, some of them have these sort of layout markings, and we only got the layout of the book a month ago or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's very preliminary. So what you're seeing is not... So if you're a wiki editor, hey, if you work on a wiki, either Wikipedia or the Wiki of Ice and Fire, please don't start adding information from these
because then it could get stuck, and if there are changes and all of that, and
wait until it's published, and maybe give us a little time to sell some books before you start taking all our cool content and putting it up on the website.
That's a bit of a problem. We've talked about that ourselves, that for the concordance, we're certainly not going to go and put it in right away, because this is... The concordance is very much about distilling pure facts, and this is largely already distilled into pure facts.
Well, it introduces many new pure facts, and that's the key appeal to it. Besides the art, it's all the new facts. So the concordance, we're probably going to wait 6 months to maybe even a year on. As it is, I still have to do a Dance of Dragons, so a little early for me to talk about it. But we would wait, and like we said with the Lands of Ice and Fire, we asked the wikis and such, don't go and start making your own copies, common creative license copies of the maps and such. Give it a little time so that, because this stuff doesn't get made if the bookseller doesn't think they'll be able to make some sort of profit on it.
Because otherwise, George doesn't want to have his Fire and Blood out eventually, and who knows, there may be a second edition. We don't know that yet. And,
so just cool on that side. But certainly read it, talk about it once it's out, and I think. I don't know if... also, I think it had a table of content, I think, the one that they have on above the tree line.
Yeah.
I shared it. I'll share the post I made pointing people out this stuff. But it's really quite exciting. It's really exciting for us to see it and see people be excited by it as well. Yes, there are little errors. We know this is all early stuff. But for the most part... I hope people like the conceit. I hope people enjoy it.
Yeah.
And
it's certainly been a very enjoyable process. Even if it turned out to be a lot longer of a process than we expected.
Yes. And with that, enjoy.
Yeah. Ask any questions.
Yeah, in
the comments, and see what we can answer.